Welcome to Protocols, Exposing Modern Antisemitism by Elder of Zion. That's me. Introduction. The Tsarist forgery, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, proposes the most infamous conspiracy theory involving Jews. But conspiracy theories about Jews long preceded its publication. After all, the medieval libels that Jews poison wells or that Jews murder Christian babies for Jewish rituals also represent conspiracy theories. The Protocols book was, perhaps, the first to describe specific steps that the Jewish cabal uses to take over the world and enrich its members, supporting wars, manipulating the media, and replacing religion with materialism. Today we have updated versions of the Protocols. They might not take the same written form as the older forgery, but they are imprinted on the brains of modern anti-Semites. These protocols include ideas such as the Jewish lobby controls the American government. Israel ethnically cleans non-Jews from Israel. Zionism is racism. Israel violates international law in myriad ways. And Jews use the Holocaust to justify their own Nazi-like crimes. In some circles, these new protocols have practically become a religion, and the people who believe the new lies are as fanatic as the ones who believe the old. This book examines these new protocols. It derives mostly from articles I have written over the past decade on my website, The Elder of Zion, about the new anti-Semitism. Researchers have found references to the new anti-Semitism as early as 1968, but Abba Eban defined it pretty well in 1973, and I quote, "Recently, we have witnessed the rise of the new left, which identifies Israel with the establishment, with acquisition, with smug satisfaction, and with, in fact, all the basic enemies. Let there be no mistake. The new left is the author and the progenitor of the new anti-Semitism. One of the chief tasks of any dialogue with the Gentile world is to prove that the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is not a distinction at all. Anti-Zionism is merely the new anti-Semitism. The old classic anti-Semitism declared that equal rights belong to all individuals within the society except the Jews. The new anti-Semitism says that the right to establish and maintain an independent national sovereign state is the prerogative of all nations, so long as they happen not to be Jewish. And when this right is exercised not by the Maldive Islands, not by the state of Gabon, not by Barbados, but by the oldest and most authentic of all nationhoods, then this is said to be exclusivism, particularism, and a flight of the Jewish people from its universal mission." End quote. We see that the new anti-Semitism isn't so new anymore. I usually call it modern anti-Semitism. Modern anti-Semitism is pervasive. It takes many forms, has many practitioners, and, sad to say, many defenders. This differs little from anti-Semitism through history. We too easily forget that the decades following the Holocaust, when the world still felt horror at the Nazis' final solution, represent an anomaly in the long history of Jew hatred. The Holocaust merely caused anti-Semitism to morph into new varieties of hate. Outside neo-Nazis, few people proudly call themselves anti-Semites, but many proudly call themselves anti-Zionists or use other euphemisms such as revisionist historians or pro-Palestinian activists. As we will show, it is but a new label on a very old bottle. My goal when I write articles for my website is to make sure that the reader learns something that they didn't know before in every post. I hope this book approaches that high bar. Anti-Semitism may have seen discussion a great deal in thousands of books and articles since the term was coined, but unfortunately it manifests itself in new ways. Section 1. Modern Anti-Semitism. This section surveys modern anti-Semitism in its most popular guises. First, we must define the term. That has become a cacophonous political battle between Zionists and anti-Zionists regarding where to draw the line between hate and legitimate criticism. I propose a definition that I believe is brief, comprehensive, and intuitively accurate. The rest of the section goes through many attributes of modern anti-Semitism, its similarities with its predecessors, the ways it justifies itself, and how the politics surrounding it end up turning Jews into pawns that both the right and left exploit. I discuss some specific manifestations of anti-Semitism today and the reasons behind them. Chapter 1. A new, better definition of anti-Semitism. To expose anti-Semitism, we must define anti-Semitism. In recent years, defining antisemitism has become a cottage industry, and it all revolves around Israel. Natan Sharansky famously created easy-to-use criteria for when criticism of Israel crosses the line into antisemitism. He formulated the famous 3D test in 2004. Here's a lengthy quote. The first D is the test of demonization. When the Jewish state is being demonized, when Israel's actions are blown out of all sensible proportion, when comparisons are made between Israelis and Nazis, and between Palestinian refugee camps and Auschwitz, this is anti-Semitism, not legitimate criticism of Israel. The second D is the test of double standards. When criticism of Israel is applied selectively, when Israel is singled out by the United Nations for human rights abuses, while the behavior of known and major abusers, such as China, Iran, Cuba, and Syria, is ignored, when Israel's Magen David Adom, alone among the world's ambulance services, is denied admission to the International Red Cross, this is anti-Semitism. The third D is the test of delegitimization, when Israel's fundamental right to exist is denied, alone among all peoples in the world, this too is anti-Semitism. End quote. It's an excellent, accurate formulation. For years, the U.S. State Department accepted it as an official definition for that specific subset of anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism. However, the need for a comprehensive and actionable definition of anti-Semitism altogether persisted, one that incorporates the 3D test as well as other definitions of anti-Semitism separate from Israel. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance came closest to an agreed definition. It issued this working definition in 2016, quote, "Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities." End quote. The IRA definition included some specific examples as guidelines, some of which involve hatred of Israel, including, quote, "denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, that is, by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor, applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, such as claims of Jews killing Jesus or the blood libel, to characterize Israel or Israelis, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis, and holding Jews collectively responsible for actions of the State of Israel." End quote. The scholars behind IRA all agreed that some hate of Israel is anti-Semitic. The IRA explicitly says criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. That doesn't stop today's Israel haters from attacking the IRA working definition and lying about it, claiming falsely that it labeled all criticism of Israel anti-Semitic, and that it was being used to stifle any criticism of Israel, even any Palestinian voices. In response to IRA, they created their own definition of anti-Semitism, which they called the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism. Its core definition, quote, "Anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews, or Jewish institutions as Jewish." End quote. The explanations it attaches to the definition include more examples of how criticism of Israel, including boycotting Israel, is not anti-Semitic than of what is anti-Semitic. The JDA, Jerusalem Declaration, emphasizes that anti-Semitism is only against Jews as Jews, which creates a huge loophole for anti-Semites who claim that they attack not Jews as Jews, but merely whoever the current proxies for Jews are: rootless cosmopolitans, New York bankers, the Hollywood elite, or Zionists. While the IRA definition tries to get as inclusive as possible in its definition of anti-Semitism, the JDA tries to get as exclusive as possible. In all other contexts, when defining racism, misogyny, or any other bigotry, the left strives for as much inclusion as possible, and the victim group is believed when they call something offensive or an attack. But in the case of anti-Semitism, the JDA authors deliberately narrow the definition to exclude anyone or anything they cannot associate with the right, Whereas the IRA working definition was not meant to be political, the JDA is nothing but political. Let's run through a couple of examples for both definitions. If someone who has no history of anti-Semitic statements comes out of the blue and says that Israel acts like Nazi Germany towards Palestinians, is that anti-Semitic? IRA says, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis qualifies as anti-Semitism, so the answer is yes. JDA says, even if contentious, it is not anti-Semitic in and of itself to compare Israel with other historical cases, including settler colonialism or apartheid. Nazism, a historical case, presumably falls under this definition, but the JDA admitted the comparison of Jews to their murderers from its examples of anti-Semitism, and since it came in response to IRA, that was obviously deliberate. What about context? Any comparison between Israel and Nazi Germany aims not to illuminate anything, but to hurt Jews by likening them to their murderers. If Israel weren't a Jewish state, the comparison would lack valence and likely wouldn't be made. This shows how far the JDA authors go in defending anti-Zionism as legitimate. Sharansky's double standards come into play vis-a-vis calling Israel racist or an apartheid state, or creating campaigns to boycott Israel when no remotely similar campaigns exist for any other state today. JDA descends into farce on this, saying, boycott, divestment, and sanctions are commonplace, nonviolent forms of political protest against states. In the Israeli case, they are not, in and of themselves, anti-Semitic. End quote. Commonplace? What other states do people boycott with the publicity that BDS has? Why single out Israel when by any measure, even accepting the most insane lies about Israel, it still doesn't approach the level of human rights violations by most states, including Western nations in wartime? Similarly, the left moots how to dismantle the Jewish state and replace it with another Arab state, falsely called binational. What other state, based on a national group, is ever told to destroy itself? What other state is constantly told that it has no right to exist? The JDA's subtext is that it is a huge coincidence that the only nation on the planet boycotted, considered illegitimate, compared to apartheid South Africa, and told its national ethos is racist, is also the only nation filled with Jews. Perhaps some people buy that argument, but most people don't, and for very good reason. The IRA has been accepted or endorsed by some 30 nations so far, and the JDA by nobody. Anti-Zionism is essentially anti-Semitism simply because there is no comparable anti in the world when one looks at the vitriol it generates. Plus, those two antis are eerily similar. The accusations Jews have faced historically are the same as what the Jewish state faces, such as undue influence over governments, murdering children for sport, and deliberately spreading disease. There is no difference between those who accuse Israel of poisoning Palestinian water or of stealing Palestinian organs, and those who once accused Jews of poisoning the wells to cause a plague or using Christian blood for Passover rituals. Another point requiring attention. Anti-Semitism has historically seen Jews accused of the most heinous crimes of the age. Israel stands accused also of the most heinous crimes of this age: racism, colonialism, indiscriminate killing and imprisonment of children, apartheid, ethnic cleansing. A passing knowledge of history makes the parallels obvious, but the JDA doesn't acknowledge this aspect of modern anti-Semitism. A definition that deliberately excludes most examples of what it purports to define is not a definition at all, but propaganda. A further example of how JDA cannot be taken seriously. In 1933, Hermann Göring insisted to Western media, quote, "The Nazi government and myself will never permit anyone being subjected to persecution solely because he is a Jew." He also said, quote, "Jews who have been ousted from public office were so treated because they were socialists." The JDA would consider the March 1933 Nazis not anti-Semitic because they claim not to persecute Jews as Jews. Many nations and organizations have adopted the IRA working definition. It remains the best definition available, its ambiguity and shortcomings notwithstanding. Israel haters continue to fight, with petitions and articles falsely claiming it deems all criticism of Israel anti-Semitic. College campuses that consider its adoption become battlegrounds. Meanwhile, another group, the Nexus Task Force, tried to replace the IRA definition with a watered-down version that, like the JDA, focuses mostly on what anti-Semitism isn't, criticism of Israel, not what it is. Like the IRA, it then must go into detailed examples of what might be considered anti-Semitic in relation to Israel, since the core definition falls short. All those definitions cannot stand on their own. They all require lengthy lists of examples and explanations because the core definitions fail to cover all instances of anti-Semitism. I decided to create my own definition. I wanted to create a definition that could stand without examples. I sought a definition that includes all kinds of anti-Semitism, but excludes what isn't. It must not treat hatred of Israel as a special case of anti-Semitism with different rules. Hating Israel is but one aspect of anti-Semitism, not a special case that has its own special circumstances. Ideally, a good definition of anti-Semitism should be short enough to fit in a tweet. Here's what I came up with. Anti-Semitism is hostility toward, denigration of, malicious lies about, or discrimination against Jews, as individual Jews, as a people, as a religion, as an ethnic group, or as a nation. I generally post this definition in a graphical format that I show in the book that I'm going to try to describe right here just so you can imagine it. So the hostility toward, denigration of, malicious lies about, or discrimination against are on the left side. The word Jews is in big letters in the middle, and then as individual Jews, as a people, as a religion, as an ethnic group, or as a nation, i.e. Israel, is on the right side. Some Jews identify as being part of the Jewish religion. Some are atheists but identify with the Jewish people. Some are part of an ethnic group. Some as Zionist, part of the Jewish nation. All of these are legitimate aspects of Jewishness, and attacking any one of them is anti-Semitic, no matter how individual Jews identify. Judaism is multifaceted, and unfair attacks on any of these facets is anti-Semitism, no matter how individuals feel. Attacking Jews as a religious group is clearly anti-Semitic, even to Jews who don't adhere to the religion. Likewise, attacking the Jewish state is just as anti-Semitic as attacking Jews as a people. Why distinguish between different aspects of Jewishness? A thoroughly secular Israeli who only identifies as Jewish through Zionism is just as much a Jew, and thus a target for anti-Semitism, as an atheist Jew in the US whose Jewish ties come from eating lox and bagels every Sunday morning. An attack on one is an attack on all. People who reject Israel as the Jewish state have no right to exclude Israel as an expression of Jewishness and target for anti-Jewish hate any more than people who reject Judaism as a religion can exclude religious Jews from a definition of what Jewishness includes. Roughly half of all Jews now live in Israel, and the vast majority of the rest support Jewish nationalism. The rejection of Zionism by a small minority therefore has no bearing on the fact that Israel is just as much a component of Jewishness today as keeping Shabbat or speaking Yiddish. The word denigration is important. Denigration specifically means unfair criticism. It excludes legitimate criticism, not just of Israel, but of Judaism itself as a religion or Jews as a people. Again, Israel is not a special case. It is a specific manifestation of Jewishness today and should be treated no better or worse than any other manifestation, with no further caveat or example necessary. Hostility toward Israel as a state is no more legitimate than hostility toward Jews as a people or as individual Jews. Hostility towards Israel is not about legitimate grievances. Serious critics of Israel might criticize Israel's decision-makers or leaders, not the entire state. When it crosses the line into hate, it crosses the line into anti-Semitism. Discrimination against Israel is no different from discrimination against Jews as an ethnic group or as a people. Saying Israel cannot join certain UN committees, be a part of the Middle East or Asia in international forums, that is the only nation whose supposed crimes make it and its people subject to boycotts, or that somehow Jewish nationalism is pernicious when every other ethnic nationalism is accepted, all of those are discrimination and bigotry. When seen through this lens, it is obvious that all of those are anti-Semitic attacks on the Jewish state because it is Jewish. The malicious lies clause is crucial. This covers not only Holocaust denial, but all sorts of clearly anti-Semitic lies about Jewish history, such as the Khazar origin myth that Ashkenazic Jews are not really Jewish, that Jews have no historic ties to Jerusalem, or that Zionists collaborated with the Nazis. The other definitions do not cover these lies, even with their examples, but the lies are obviously anti-Semitic. This is perhaps the biggest shortcoming of the other definitions. I think this definition has great advantages over the others. It is more accurate, all-encompassing, and doesn't appear to include things that aren't anti-Semitic or to exclude things that are. Israel isn't a special case, it is a core example of what Jewishness means today. The existence of anti-Zionist Jews doesn't invalidate it as anti-Semitism, any more than the existence of capitalist Jews doesn't invalidate the anti-Semitism of the far right, saying they hate Jews because they are the communists. We will examine numerous examples of modern anti-Semitism. Herein lies overwhelming proof that today's single-minded hate of Israel that we see in the media, from the UN, from human rights organizations, and on campus amounts to just another manifestation of the age-old hate for Jews.